This is some bullshit. You already went. It's only fair I take my turn.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome to another casual review. It's been a minute since the last one. I got tied up with a few things, but I'm finally back to review some more of the games that I've been playing that are in my backlog, or were in my backlog, because I have finished those games and now I'm reviewing them. And the next game I want to talk about has a little bit of a preamble, some context to it. I have a very long relationship with Yakuza. My first time playing this series seriously was with Yakuza 0, but my first time actually playing it was the demo for 3 way back on the PS3, and then they offered Yakuza 4 as part of PlayStation Plus way back, and so I played a bit of Yakuza 4 when that came out, because back in the day, PlayStation Plus wasn't just 2 or 3 new games every month. It was a library of games that you could access for free, and I'm pretty sure Yakuza 4 was one of those. But the point is, I never really actually sat down and played through a Yakuza from start to finish until Yakuza 0. And lately, the series has actually changed from a 3D beat-em-up to a full-fledged JRPG. And while I was slightly disappointed at first that the series went to a JRPG, I'm at least happy that RGG Studio maintained the 3D beat-em-up by allocating it to a new spin-off series called Judgment. Judgment stars a new protagonist and has almost no real narrative connection to Yakuza, other than the fact that the game takes place in the hub city of Yakuza, which is Kamurocho. And despite not having too many narrative connections with the series, there are some connections in the world of Yakuza, like Little Asia in Kamurocho is still being rebuilt after the big fire in Yakuza 6. So there's some connections like that in Judgment, but no major characters from Yakuza make their way into Judgment. But one thing that really stuck out to me that disappointed me about Judgment is that it was very clear from relatively early on that this was indeed a spin-off series and not something that got even close to the time and budget of a mainline Yakuza game. While Judgment still does maintain the level of quality you would expect from a Dragon Age and Yakuza game, it suffers from something I want to really dive into specifically in this review, and that's inconsistency. So this is a review, but it's a very targeted review. I wanted to really target topic by topic and break down what I see as inconsistent in this game. So first off, there's presentational inconsistency in Judgment. One thing that really bothered me about Judgment is how pretty much like 90% of the story in this game is delivered through the in-engine half cutscenes that were introduced in Yakuza 6. And while I get that not everything can be this high budget keyframed animated cutscene, it's still a little disappointing because it just marks a level of, there's still just a level of quality that is missing in these half cutscenes. Some of them are lit and shot really well to the point where they would start and I wouldn't be able to tell if it was a real cutscene or one of these half cutscenes, but some have just really bizarre camera angles, really bad lighting, really bad animations, minimal facial animations. Specifically, any scene with eating or drinking has really janky neck and head movements and minimal facial animations, but that's just a specific example. A lot of these cutscenes just have something lacking in them that makes them hard to really connect to. I feel like actual Yakuza quality cutscenes are super rare in Judgment, and I get that from one point of view that could mean that they're kind of like a treat that you get and they're really special when they happen, but from my perspective, the half cutscenes just kind of wore me down so much that it got to the point where when you would actually get a real cutscene, I just kind of was checked out. But one thing I do want to mention is that I played the PS5 native version of this game, and it looks really good. It was really cool walking around and seeing Kamurocho looking really good at night. Everything just pops. All the colors are super vibrant and glowy. The reflections and the puddles on the street and all these little details look super nice. But the lighting is a bit intense in the daytime in certain areas, which looked a bit weird. The light seems kind of blown out, like they really dialed the exposure up, but other than that, overall it looks really nice. But of course that doesn't change the fact that the in-engine half cutscenes have very varying degrees of quality to them. Another form of inconsistency in Judgment is narrative inconsistency. The overall structure and writing of this game is pretty solid, but there are some moments, particularly in the final act, that were just mind-boggling, and not in a good way. To say the least, they play pretty fast and loose with the rules of reality. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there was a lot of stuff that happens that you kind of just have to accept at face value and not think too hard about. Which I understand isn't new for Yakuza, but I felt it was particularly bad in Judgment. Very Yakuza 5 levels of just like, okay, sure, why not? All right. And there were also some just very basic, general, logical, and character inconsistencies in this game. There was a specific example where Yagami picks up a gun in an underground arcade, and to unload the gun, he actually discharges it and fires it in the air at the ceiling. And, you know, some people may not think much of it, but Japan is a very condensed city. It's a very vertical city. This is an underground arcade, and I understand like it might be, I don't know, layered or whatever, but you're someone who's trained in law and is a private detective, and you're discharging active rounds into the ceiling of what is possibly a populated residency or commercial building. You would think that he would know better to do that, and he would just unload the gun. Maybe he just really didn't want the bullets to be used, but if that was the case, you could just shoot them at the ground. To me, I think they just wanted it to look cool, and they didn't really think too hard about the actual ramifications of that action. To me, it just says a lot about a lot of the things that happen in that game's story, where it's like, yeah, we just do stuff because it looks or feels cool, not because it actually makes sense. And another thing that blew my mind was that there's some actually pretty important character moments, specifically between Kaito and Yagami. Like, they actually get into a fight and they conflict with each other, but it's clearly unimportant because it's not even given VO, and it's treated as a sub-story in the game's plot. Like, if it was a side story, then it would be optional, but it's not optional, so it's not a side story, so just put in the effort and at least do VO or something. It blows my mind. This is what I'm talking about like narrative inconsistency. It's like these things that seemingly have weight, but they clearly don't because they weren't given effort. I also wasn't really that stricken by Yagami. In terms of series protagonists, I think he's one of the weakest ones in the Yakuza series. He just didn't really strike me in any particular way. I didn't like him or dislike him. He just kind of existed to me. I think his backstory is cool. I just feel like the lack of emotional and narrative intelligence for Judgment entirely kind of made Yagami suffer as collateral damage in that case, if that makes sense. In my opinion, I think the strongest characters of Judgment are some of the side characters like Higashi and Hamada. And I also feel that Judgment suffers for something that just about every Yakuza game suffers from, which is what I call constant information regurgitation. There will be 10 minutes of just talking and talking and talking, and half of it is stuff that we already knew. They're just repeating it in a different place from a different character, and it's like, I'm not getting anything particularly insightful about this. I'm just witnessing someone's reaction to this information, and it was exactly how I imagined it. This could have just been fade to black. Oh, you explained that? Stuff like that really makes these conversations drag on way longer than they need to. And these could be really draining, especially if, you know, what I talked about earlier, if it's all presented in these half cutscenes with barely any facial or body animations. And I don't want to spoil things like I mentioned earlier, but I felt like the main antagonist really needed some more time to shine. I thought they did some interesting things with the main antagonist. They just didn't get enough time on screen as the actual antagonist for you to really feel the impact of your fights with them or of your confrontations with them. And this game also has kind of like a reputation mechanic where if you do certain sub-stories or side cases that like certain citizens of the city will walk around in the city, you can kind of interact with them and they'll show up in fights or whatever like that. That's fine. It was fine, I guess. But a lot of these side stories weren't particularly interesting to me. I actually thought Yakuza 7 does a way better job of connecting you to a local community. Like, it's just like when your interactions with certain people are literally just seeing them on the street or occasionally they show up in fights, it could be cute. But in like Yakuza 7, they could be summons and they have actual practical application at times, or you can hire them for the business minigame. So there is like legitimately cute and interesting and practical ways of interacting with the local community in Yakuza 7 as opposed to Judgment, as I mentioned. So the last form of inconsistency that I want to talk about is gameplay inconsistency. And this one isn't as egregious, I think, as the narrative or presentational inconsistency, but there's still inconsistencies nonetheless. For starters, I want to talk about the enemy variety. You have all kinds of different, I mean, I say all kinds, but you have like the normal goons, you have the kind of bigger guys, you have gun guys, you have weapon guys, and you know, that can shake up combat in interesting ways, but it also can be kind of unpredictable and frustrating when you're kind of caught in a chaotic situation because they all do different types of damage. Judgment was actually the very first Yakuza game that I can think of where I died multiple times during my playthrough just to being caught out in weird, wacky situations. And there's a couple times I'll own because I was getting used to certain mechanics that were different. The hotkey healing kind of screwed me a couple times, but there was a couple where it legitimately felt like I had no control over what was going on. I just got stuck in this huge stun lock and there was nothing I could do except take a beating until I got killed. And one thing that really frustrated me was the mortal wound system. I thought it was a nice way of adding tension and stress to a combat situation where it's just like, oh crap, if this person hits me, it's gonna suck, you know, because it permanently, or I guess temporarily decreases your maximum health until you get it checked out at a doctor in the city. But if they pull out some really cheap moves and there's nothing you can really do to dodge them, except for like cheesing it, I guess, then you know, you just get your maximum health decreased and there's nothing you can really do about it. And then you gotta go all the way across the city, go all the way into the sewers, go all the way through the sewers, get to the guy, run all the way back through the sewers, get up and run all the way across the city back to where you were. And it's just like, this could have been streamlined somehow. One thing I really did like was the two combat stances in Judgment. I love how they kind of each serve a unique purpose. You use Tiger to build your EX meter, and then you use Crane style to kind of burn your EX meter. One is better for one-on-one fights, the other is better for group fights. So they each have their unique purposes, and I thought it was a good way of encouraging the player to keep switching it up and learning both styles. But I do wish switching styles was a bit faster and more dynamic. It kind of pauses the action for it to take effect, so it'd be kind of cool. I understand it would be kind of difficult from an animation standpoint, but it would be really nice if you could swap styles mid-combo or something like that. You could do some crazy stuff. And you can Tiger drop in this game, and it's still very satisfying, just Tiger dropping a dude through a window. Feels good every time, 10 out of 10. And then there's also some not fun, like, core gameplay mechanics, like the tailing missions. They're just a waste of time, man. They're not even bad or frustrating, they're just unnecessary. Like, at least with games like Assassin's Creed 2, the tailing isn't great, but you're learning something while you're doing it. While you're following people, you're hearing the conversations, you're learning a bit more about the people you're following, more about maybe the overall situation. One that really sticks out in Assassin's Creed 2 is when you're following the Templars in Venice, and you're really hearing about how deep this conspiracy thing goes. It's like, hey, this is a tailing mission that has a lot of exposition to it. Whereas Judgment, that very rarely, if not never, happens. You are literally just following a dude, occasionally hiding behind something, and then it ends, and then you get the exposition. So it's like, couldn't we have just like cut out some of the middle ground here? I don't know. And like I said earlier, the side cases didn't particularly interest me. I think this game is at its best when you're sticking to the main story, which kind of is disappointing if you love Yakuza, because sometimes the best part of Yakuza is you get to a new chapter and you got all these sub-stories you can now do, whereas with Judgment it's just like, more sub-stories, I don't wanna, but so that was kind of egregious to me. And they're just, because they're just very repetitive and unrewarding, I think. They all kind of share a very similar structure, and they all have pretty much the exact same reward, which is just, here's some extra cash, and this person might be walking around town, you know? It didn't feel as meaningful as the side stories in Yakuza 7 where, you know, you might get a summon or someone you can use in the business minigame. And I was also disappointed in the lack of minigame variety. The minigames that are there are fun, but mostly unremarkable or uninteresting. You know, you got darts back, you got the drone racing, which is fun until it gets old pretty quick. The board game is fun, but it is kind of just a regurgitation of everything you already do in that game, just with a cute twist. But there's no karaoke. Like, what's the point of having a new series protagonist if they can't sing Baka Mitai? Like, what? I also think Judgment lacks the combat variety of Yakuza by really limiting the amount of tools that Yagami can use during an actual fight. He can only use very specific weapons and things you find on the street. You can't carry weapons into battle like you could into Kiwami 2. So even as a continuation of the Dragon Engine 3D brawler formula, it's nowhere near as fun as Yakuza 6 or Kiwami 2. Like, it's a de-evolution. And you never really get an actual opportunity to feel like a detective either. You're very much on this linear path. You pick up the items the game wants you to pick up, you come to the conclusions the game wants you to come to, because ultimately this is a linear story that has a linear beginning, middle, and end. You can't deviate from that, which I understand, but there's still no agency in this game when it comes to the stuff that is kind of meant to make you feel like you have agency. And it's just like, you compare the detective elements to this, where you literally just walk around a 3D space and pick up items and you don't progress until you find the thing you're supposed to find. You compare that to something like Detroit Become Human that just nailed the detective aspects, in my opinion. And I'm not expecting a game like this to have all the different outcomes and solutions that a Quantic Dream game might have, but Detroit specifically does such a great job of making it feel like your investigations and discoveries actually matter and have impact, which I didn't feel was the case in Judgment at all. And the requirements for 100%ing this game are insane. After platinuming Yakuza Kiwami 2, I was more than good just leaving this once I rolled credits. Just, no thank you, not for me, goodbye. Ultimately, Judgment feels like a game that was made by cutting a lot of corners. But it still holds its own as a Yakuza spinoff, and it's still fun in its own way, despite the issues I have presented here. I still had fun with the game. It's still a Yakuza game. There's the classic quote that was attributed to the Batman Arkham series where, like, Arkham games are like pizza, even when it's bad, it's good. That's kind of the example I would use here. It's like, it's still a Yakuza game, so even when it's not at its best, it's still pretty fun, and more fun than a lot of other games that are out there. But I think this just suffered from a lot of problems that stem from a lack of time, effort, and budget. Like I said, I feel like this was a game that was a product of cutting corners. I feel like they just wanted to make this interesting spin-off to appease the 3D brawler crowd of Yakuza, and that's pretty much all it's there for. Because the story is good, but ultimately makes some very bizarre decisions. It looks really nice, except when it really doesn't, and it's really fun, but sometimes it's really not. So that's, like, overall, it's just a very inconsistent package that at the end of the day, I like, but it's very low in the grand scheme of things when it comes to comparing them to the other Yakuza games. So for everything I just mentioned, and, you know, everything I didn't mention, the overall score I would give Judgment is a 6 out of 10. I think it's good, not great, not particularly remarkable, but not bad. It's a decent game with a lot of issues and frustrations that keep it low as a Yakuza game, but I think there's a lot of room to grow with future iteration. I think Lost Judgment has the potential to right a lot of the wrongs of this game. And I still think it's worth a shot if you're interested, if you love Yakuza, but if you're just joining the series and looking for a jumping in point, I would say you start with 0 or Like a Dragon, but, you know, 0. I guess I would place it low in my rankings, so I guess I should probably just say what my ranking of the Yakuza series is. From best to worst, my order would go 6, 0, Kiwami 2, Like a Dragon, Kiwami, 4, Judgment 5-3 at the worst. And you can take that however you want. And that's all for me. Thanks for watching. If you like this review, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, or subscribe to my Patreon. If you support me at the credits tier like these guys did, then you get your name featured in any quote-unquote main video I make. And with that, thanks again, and stay tuned for more.